The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton as 12-year-old Rebecca Morrison approached the precision shooting range with her mother's silver star clutched tightly in her small palm. The medal caught the California desert light as she walked past rows of Marines conducting standard qualification exercises, her determined stride drawing curious stares from seasoned personnel who wondered what business a child had on their training facility. Colonel Martinez spotted her first, his weathered face breaking into the kind of condescending smile reserved for civilian visitors who clearly didn't understand military protocol. "What do we have here?" he called out to his assembled staff, his voice carrying the dismissive tone of someone who'd spent 3 decades dealing with misguided requests from people who watched too many action movies. "A little girl who thinks she can play soldier on our range." Rebecca stopped directly in front of the colonel, meeting his amused gaze with unwavering composure that seemed far too mature for her age. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward from his position near the equipment shed, his experienced eyes immediately recognizing something familiar in the girl's bearing that reminded him of another Marine he'd served alongside in Afghanistan. Captain Sarah Morrison had possessed that same quiet determination, the same unflinching focus under pressure that had made her one of the Corps' most effective snipers before an insurgent's bullet ended her career and her life. "This has to be Sarah's daughter," Rodriguez thought as he observed Rebecca's systematic assessment of the range conditions, noting how she automatically checked wind flags and evaluated sight lines with the unconscious competence of someone who'd been taught by a professional. Colonel Martinez continued his dismissive commentary, explaining to his audience why children had no place on military installations, but Rodriguez found himself studying Rebecca's posture and the way she held her mother's medal. The girl wasn't intimidated by the institutional skepticism surrounding her, instead displaying the kind of emotional regulation that impressed someone whose job involved evaluating personnel for high-stress assignments in combat environments. Captain Williams had been preparing equipment and targets while the preliminary evaluations were conducted, setting up the range for what he anticipated would be a brief demonstration that would satisfy the girl's request while proving Colonel Martinez's point about civilian limitations. "We'll start with basic familiarization at 50 meters, Williams announced after completing his preparation checklist, selecting an M4 carbine for the initial assessment while maintaining the flexibility necessary to accommodate this unusual training situation. Martinez positioned himself where he could observe both Rebecca's shooting technique and the target results, anticipating the moment when reality would deflate the girl's pretensions and validate his assessment that children belonged in classrooms rather than on military ranges. His confidence remained high despite the professional preparation surrounding the demonstration, as he couldn't conceive of a 12-year-old possessing skills that rivaled those of trained Marines. Rebecca had been listening to these pronouncements while conducting her own environmental assessment of the desert stillness, minimal thermal activity, and consistent lighting that created ideal conditions for precision work that would eliminate environmental excuses for poor performance. Rebecca settled into a supported prone position behind the M4 carbine that had been selected for the initial demonstration, her body alignment and weapon handling showing none of the hesitation or uncertainty that typically characterized first-time shooters. Instead, she displayed the fluid competence that came from hundreds of hours of careful practice under her mother's instruction. The silence that settled over the range held the weight of institutional skepticism and family honor as Rebecca prepared to demonstrate whether Captain Sarah Morrison's legacy lived on through more than just memory and silver trinkets. Her breathing had already settled into the controlled rhythm her mother had drilled into her during countless weekend training sessions, the 4-count cycle that Sarah Morrison had learned in sniper school and passed down to her daughter like a family heirloom. The trigger press was smooth and deliberate, breaking cleanly with the kind of technique that typically required months of intensive training to develop properly. The sharp crack of the rifle shot echoed across the desert hills, followed immediately by the distinctive ping of a bullet striking steel at the target 50 meters downrange. Through his binoculars, Sergeant Thompson observed the target with professional assessment, his expression shifting from polite interest to genuine surprise as he announced his findings. "Dead center bullseye," Thompson called out, his voice carrying clearly across the range. "Clean hit, textbook placement." Colonel Martinez had positioned himself where he could watch both Rebecca's technique and the target results, expecting to witness the kind of scattered shots that would validate his assumptions about children attempting adult activities. The single-centered hit was impressive, but hardly conclusive evidence of exceptional ability that couldn't be attributed to beginner's luck. "One shot proves nothing," Martinez declared with confident dismissal. "Let's move to 150 meters and see what happens when the real challenges begin." Rebecca methodically adjusted her position for the increased distance, making systematic corrections for bullet drop and environmental factors with the kind of technical knowledge that typically required years of intensive training to develop. Her environmental reading and scope adjustments impressed the military professionals present, who recognized behaviors that reflected serious instruction rather than childhood enthusiasm or casual familiarity with firearms. The demonstration progressed to 300 meters, where Rebecca's performance transcended impressive and entered the realm of extraordinary as she maintained precision that defied statistical probability for someone her age and supposed training level. Staff Sergeant Chun confirmed the measurements using calibrated equipment, his voice carrying professional amazement as he announced results that challenged everyone's understanding of marksmanship development. 5 rounds. Total group size approximately 1.5 inches at 300 meters. That exceeds advanced sniper qualification standards. The silence that followed this announcement was profound and uncomfortable as everyone present processed the reality that they had just witnessed a 12-year-old girl demonstrate skills that surpassed those of elite military personnel. The implications extended far beyond simple family pride into questions about talent identification, training methods, and institutional assumptions about capability development. Major Wright found herself confronting data that challenged everything she thought she understood about marksmanship development and age-related limitations. "Staff Sergeant Chun, are you certain about those measurements?" Verified by multiple observers using calibrated equipment, Chun confirmed. "The performance is documented and consistent with advanced precision shooting standards." Colonel Martinez stared at the target through his binoculars with an expression that suggested someone watching their entire worldview collapse in real time. The confident predictions he had made about civilian incompetence and childish fantasies now seemed not just wrong, but embarrassingly ignorant of capabilities that exceeded his own institutional experience. Before anyone could respond to this emotional validation, the demonstration was interrupted by the distinctive sound of approaching helicopter rotors that announced the arrival of personnel whose presence would transform the morning's events from local curiosity into something with far-reaching implications for everyone involved. The UH-60 Black Hawk touched down on the designated landing zone, its rotor wash creating dust clouds that temporarily obscured the range as General Patterson and 2 Pentagon officials disembarked with the kind of purposeful movement that indicated they had received reports about Rebecca's performance through official channels. General Patterson's presence immediately elevated the demonstration from base-level curiosity to institutional significance, as word of the 12-year-old's extraordinary marksmanship had reached decision-makers whose authority extended far beyond Camp Pendleton's boundaries. Kevin Morrison had been listening to these discussions with growing anxiety about institutional pressures that could reshape his daughter's childhood into something focused entirely on military preparation rather than balanced development that included civilian experiences and relationships. "General," Kevin said with respectful firmness, "I appreciate the military's interest in Rebecca's abilities, but she's 12 years old. Her education and normal development have to be priorities regardless of what special training opportunities might be available." Margaret Morrison had been reviewing the same documentation while assessing how institutional interest in Rebecca's abilities could be channeled into appropriate development opportunities rather than premature advancement that might overwhelm a 12-year-old girl with adult responsibilities and expectations. "General," Margaret said carefully, While Rebecca's technical performance is exceptional, any training programs must account for psychological development and educational requirements. Accelerated military training can create problems that don't manifest until years later. The concern reflected Margaret's understanding of institutional tendencies to focus on immediate capability development without adequate consideration for long-term personal growth that included civilian education, social relationships, and emotional maturity. Dr. Chun had been observing Rebecca's responses to increasing institutional attention, noting that her stress indicators remained stable despite discussions about her future that involved Pentagon-level officials and potential life-changing opportunities. General Patterson, Dr. Chun interjected with professional authority. Miss Morrison demonstrates exceptional psychological resilience, but I recommend comprehensive evaluation before implementing intensive training programs. Her emotional maturity is impressive, but she's still developing fundamental aspects of identity and social relationships. Dr. Chun had been documenting Rebecca's psychological responses throughout the demonstration, noting that her stress indicators remained remarkably stable despite the increasing pressure and public scrutiny. The girl's emotional regulation under challenging conditions impressed someone whose job involved evaluating personnel for high-stress assignments. Miss Morrison, Dr. Chen said with genuine professional admiration, "Your performance demonstrates exceptional stress management along with technical competence. How do you maintain focus under pressure?" "My mother taught me that shooting was like meditation," Rebecca replied, while beginning the systematic process of making her rifle safe. "If you focus on the process instead of the results, the pressure becomes less important than the technique." The philosophical sophistication of her response impressed everyone present who understood the psychological complexity of performing under scrutiny. Rebecca's ability to maintain perspective during public evaluation suggested maturity that extended far beyond her chronological age. General Patterson's response indicated institutional learning from previous experiences with gifted personnel who had been advanced too rapidly through military systems without adequate support for comprehensive development. "Doctor, our current protocols emphasize mentorship and gradual skill development rather than acceleration that could create adjustment problems." Miss Morrison would receive advanced instruction within frameworks that maintain normal educational and social experiences. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez approached Rebecca's position with obvious pride, mixed with concern about the institutional attention such abilities would inevitably attract. "Outstanding shooting, Miss Morrison. Your mother would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished." The words carried weight beyond their tactical meaning, as Rodriguez understood the emotional significance of honoring Captain Sarah Morrison's legacy through demonstrated excellence that validated years of private training and preparation that had been conducted away from institutional oversight. "Yes, ma'am," Sergeant Thompson confirmed. "Staff Sergeant Chun, Lieutenant Davis, and myself independently verified all measurements using standardized procedures. The performance is documented according to official marksmanship evaluation protocols." General Patterson had been reviewing comprehensive documentation of Rebecca's demonstration while coordinating with Pentagon officials about appropriate institutional responses that would honor Captain Sarah Morrison's sacrifice, while ensuring her daughter's development proceeded through channels that prioritized long-term success over immediate capability exploitation. "Miss Morrison," General Patterson said with formal recognition, "your mother's legacy continues through your remarkable abilities, and the Marine Corps has an obligation to support your development in ways that honor both her sacrifice and your potential." The institutional commitment reflected military understanding that exceptional talent required careful cultivation rather than aggressive advancement that could compromise personal development. Rebecca Morrison had transformed personal grief into demonstrated excellence, while establishing herself as someone whose abilities commanded respect from the highest levels of military leadership. Her systematic approach to honoring her mother's memory through precision shooting had created opportunities for development that extended far beyond individual recognition into institutional learning about talent identification and appropriate support systems. The afternoon breeze carried sounds of ongoing training activities and international cooperation that had emerged from one child's courage to request simple access to honor her mother's memory. Rebecca Morrison had transformed personal grief into institutional improvement, while establishing herself as someone whose exceptional abilities would continue serving purposes larger than individual achievement throughout whatever future military service awaited her development and commitment to excellence. Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton had become more than just a military installation. It represented proof that exceptional talent could emerge from unexpected sources and create positive change that honored the past, while building foundations for continued service to values and objectives that transcended individual recognition or institutional boundaries. The desert sun climbed toward its afternoon peak, illuminating the precision range where a 12-year-old girl had demonstrated that capability knew no age limits when combined with proper instruction, dedication, and the kind of emotional strength that turned personal loss into professional excellence that inspired institutional change and challenged assumptions about potential that existed within military families.